So everyone's on my last video saying the audio cut out around the 30-minute mark, and it cut out for about a minute, okay? So I don't know if y'all saw anything past there. So I'm gonna re-upload what was after the audio glitch that did not happen on X or Rumble. Am I still recording? What we're discussing here is super essential in the whole conversation about immigration to the US. And they're shipping all these people in. We gotta understand that these are decades old, century-old strategies in place. Hey, internet friends. In college, my American history professor on the first day of class asked us if you wanted to defeat the U.S., how would you do it? Well, how would you defeat a unified nation? From within, of course. Everybody wants to talk about immigration this week like it's Biden's fault, or it's Trump's fault, or it's Kamala's fault. But immigration isn't just about who's coming. It's about who we are. It's like add more ingredients to your grandma's recipe. It changes the flavor for better or for worse. So let's discuss the plans put forth decades and decades ago to divide America. Whenever these things get brought up in mainstream discourse, they're never explained, just immediately shot down as conspiracy theory, which I believe is a disservice to all because I believe y'all are smart enough to come to your own conclusions. Let's lay out the facts, outline the ideas, and let you decide if these plans are merely theory, white supremacy talking points, or actually happening right in front of you. In the year 2000, the UN wrote a 177-page report on replacement migration. Basically, this document examined how migration could counteract population decrease in places like Japan, South Korea, and numerous European countries including the US, because of declining birth rates. And this document presented a litany of migration scenarios. It examined how immigration could address labor shortages and keep the economy rolling. But notice, curiously, it's not recommended that these nations encourage population growth through incentivizing family building, like we've seen Hungary do in recent years. But the solution is to bus in all these migrants. The United Nations doubled down on these migration plans in their 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Agenda 2030 is like the big butch Frankenstein sister to Agenda 21, okay? Which was adopted in September of 2015 and comprised of 17 Sustainable Development Goals. I break all this down in my book, The Deep State Encyclopedia, but basically Agenda 2030 outlines a blueprint for world socialism where migration is key to every development goal. All these aliens are the MVPs, with migrants recognized as, quote, agents of development. Keep in mind, 193 member states of the United Nations unanimously adopted the 2030 Agenda. If everybody from every nation is spread out everywhere, what's the point of nations, borders, and countries? Almost like a United Nations. I mean, no pun intended, the plan is right there in the name. They weren't hiding it from y'all. Might as well have a one world government while we're at it. So can we say that the open southern border of the U.S. is part of a deliberate plan to implement Agenda 2030? Well, don't answer that yet because there's more to consider. We got to go back to 1966, when Richard Cloward and Francis Fox-Piven, two sociologists, were teaching at Columbia University. They developed the Cloward-Piven strategy to essentially overload the U.S. welfare system, abusing it to the point of collapse, which would then send the U.S. into crisis mode. And the response to that crisis would be radical social change. They were hoping that this collapse would disrupt American capitalism. And in its place, there would be guaranteed annual income, so all the poor would have money and we could all live happily ever after on universal basic income. And no one will be defecating in the street or eating geese from the park. What a utopia. We'll all hold hands and sing songs. What does the Cloward-Piven strategy have to do with immigration, you ask? Well, baby, we gotta get those numbers up. Can't overload a system if there's no overload. So if we were to believe such a strategy is being implemented now, we could say that everyone flooding into the country who is on welfare is being used as a pawn in the army to destroy the current system. And the people, quote unquote, helping these aliens are well-funded, organized groups demanding more and more from the system. And the whole problem, that's not really a problem for people trying to implement this strategy, theoretically, allegedly, hypothetically. The problem is that our country is $40 trillion in debt, and at some point it's going to be like trying to squeeze water out of a rock. You're trying to milk a rock. Can't do it. And if this whole collapse comes to pass, it's a wrap for the Republic. You're done. You're done. Is there another angle, though, a racial angle to all of this? Besides just the diabolical scheming and forever being on the teat of the government? For the purposes of this video, I'm not saying there is. I'm not saying there's not. I'm saying it's up to you to decide. But we got to go back to 1924 to examine the details. So there was this politician who founded the Pan-European Union. His name was Richard von Coudenhove-Kalergi, whose dad was Austrian and whose mom was Japanese. Richard himself was a famous Freemason, and he was married to the famous Jewish Viennese actress Ida Roland. It's important to discuss the Pan-European Union as it was the predecessor to the European Union and aimed to foster a unified European state in a post-World War I world, with a stated goal of advocating for peace, cooperation, and integration among European nations. Richard was really on one. He envisioned a world divided into enormous regional power blocks. Where popular history and mainstream media says his plan and writings were misinterpreted, starts where the plan to create a unified Europe began with replacing the native populations of Europe with a mixed race population, watering down the culture and erasing Europeans, which is suggested would make them a more controllable, homogenous populace because they wouldn't be weighed down by all these pesky things like culture and tradition, meaning they'd be easier to govern under something like a global regime. We can pretty much deduce that objectively, Richard here didn't have a problem with anything interracial, as he was clearly a product of it. He was an Austrian and Japanese baby. He was an Austronese baby. Where the ADL, who was founded to protect a Jewish man who was found guilty of raping and murdering a 13-year-old Mary Fagan, says this all gets very anti-Semitic, is that it suggested that Jewish architects are behind this plan as it's been modernized. Because they have all these Jewish organizations across Europe and America that get private and government funding specifically to help place these immigrants. And the only country that doesn't have to accept immigrants is Israel because it's socially and politically acceptable for Israel to remain racially pure. The ADL says that believing any part of this plan is anti-Semitic and it's absolutely not happening. None of this is happening right now. You're just imagining it because you're anti-Semitic. I have a clip that I'll show on the Rumble and X version of this video, but it's probably too zesty, too spicy for YouTube. Again, to bring it up to present day, you see such destabilization of countries and cultures through NATO's forever wars, where the result is flooding Europe in the West with refugees and people who have distinctly different cultures from the countries that they're being placed in. And as we've seen it play out, to our horror, some of these cultures, not all, but some, are simply incompatible with European or American cultures, social and religious norms. And this is why it's a topic of discussion. This is why Springfield, Ohio, and Aurora, and small towns in Alabama are being discussed, because they're injecting these towns with huge migrant populations. And it's like oil and water, honey. And instead of simply minding our own business and focusing on these issues on a national level, our politicians are warmongers who team up with the military contractors and make huge money on war while everyone else suffers. So what do you think? Conspiracy theory or conspiracy fact? How would you defeat the U.S.? How would it be possible? Let me know what you think, internet friends. You know, I always look forward to your comments. Thank you so much for watching, subscribing, and supporting my channel on Patreon, and buying my book, The Deep State Encyclopedia. Bye.
I'm just a fake silhouette, avoiding every threat. I wanna stay like a silhouette, but I can't do that. No, I can't do that.
What difference at this point does it make? Those weapons of mass destruction got to be somewhere. Nope, no weapons over there.
We should not argue in the context of yesterday. We should really first analyze how the world has dramatically changed and is changing in an accelerating way.
I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive.
Something that I'm breathing, telling me to sleep in. Face behind my lids like nothing gets done. Living by a bad truth, swallow it like who knew. Marching to the drums like pam 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 pam. Sliding by the beaches, gotta have a secret. Life is plain peaches, tell nobody my secret. Drowning out the teaching, gotta have a secret. I'm just a fake silhouette, avoiding every threat. I wanna stay like a silhouette, but I can't do that. No, 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 I can't do that.